So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Stakeholder Mapping and Engagement for Gender Equality Plan Implementation, Experiences from Central Eastern European Universities. This webinar is part of the Sister Project series, the Sister Project webinar series coordinated by AgriGEP, and today's webinar is offered by AgriGEP. My name is Panayota Volikarpu, and I'm coming from the Yellow Window team. So to start with some housekeeping rules before we dive into our webinar, please keep your microphones muted during the webinar, but feel free to leave your cameras on. It will be great to see some faces. This webinar, as you will see, is recorded and will be then uploaded on YouTube, but your names and videos will not be shown, so don't worry for that. We will also exclude the Q&A session of this webinar, and this will not be included in the recorded. For that session, for the Q&A session, which will be the last part of our webinar, feel free to type your questions in the chat box during the discussion. We'll address your questions at the end. Please make sure to keep them as concise and prompt as possible to ensure that everyone has the chance to participate. So to start, today's objectives. As you will know, this webinar aims to help you understand the key concepts and methodologies for stakeholder mapping and engagement related to gender equality plan implementation. You will gain some insights into the practical application of stakeholder mapping and engagement from Central Eastern European universities. You will learn about the challenges faced in stakeholder engagement and how to overcome, what are the strategies to overcome such challenges. And we will reflect on the impact of stakeholder mapping and engagement on the gender equality plan implementation and sustainability. We'll start today's presentation with an opening message by Julianna Kobolák from MATE, the Hungarian University of Agriculture and Life Sciences, the coordinator of AgriGEP. We will then hear from the partners of AgriGEP on their experience with stakeholder mapping and engagement and mobilization, and then we will give the floor to two guest speakers to hear on their experiences and challenges and strategies related to our topic. We'll finalize this webinar with the Q&A session with your questions, and for now, I'll pass the floor to Julianna.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and I welcome to the second webinar of our Gender Equality webinar series. This series is provided by the sixth sister project and coordinated by AgriGEP. All the webinars are focused on important aspects of GEP implementation and gender equality. As you can see, and probably some of you participated, we already had one webinar in the last months concentrating on the effective crisis communication management. The current one will focus on stakeholder mapping, while the next one that we will announce at the end of the webinar is going to happen in the middle of November, focusing on embedding inclusivity in communication. And the full forthcoming ones will related to further important issues which are related to gender equality plan strategy and gender equality issues that universities are facing when they are focusing on the establishment of their strategy. I hope that you will find today's webinar useful and will follow the rest of the series. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Juliana, for the introduction. Indeed, we'll mention and provide all the links needed for the next upcoming webinar. So now I would like to invite Jana Mazancová for a conversation on the AgriGEP's experience, as I mentioned. Jana is a senior researcher at the Department of Sustainable Technology at the Czech University of Life Sciences in Prague, one of the partners of AgriGEP. So Jana, thanks a lot for being here to share your experience. So to start with and to set the, let's say, the base of our discussion, as AgriGEP partners embarked on the stakeholder mapping and mobilization efforts, could you start by explaining why these processes are critical, not only for the gender equality plan implementation, but also for ensuring its long-term sustainability.
Okay, thank you very much, Pan. Welcome all again. Thank you for being with us here and also giving me an opportunity to share our experience and what we learned within AgriGEP. Yeah, thanks for the question, which I start rather general and then go more to specificities and really like what we learn and yeah, our living experience, I would say, at the institutional level. So when it comes to implementing gender equality plans effectively and ensuring they last, stakeholder mapping and consequent stakeholder mobilization are basic and foundational steps. And there are several highlights that I found quite crucial to realize while we are talking about this exercise. Ben, whether we can move to next slide. Thank you very much. So looking at these 5 points, and we may find more, of course, but yeah, let's say that these are the most important ones. First, focusing on creating broad support and buy-in. Stakeholder mapping allows us to identify everyone who plays a role in the GEP implementation or is somehow impacted by the GEP. So meaning more or less everyone at the institution and even beyond. If we are at the university, so looking to the top management, but then going also to the faculty, so the teaching staff, and of course, administrative staff as well, and students. By involving them early, so meaning already in the designing of GEPs, and then clearly communicating the GEP goals, ensure that we build a shared ownership, that they feel engaged, they feel that GEPs will address their needs later on. And this is essential not only for successful launch, but also for embedding gender equality as a core institutional value. That is actually the aim of GEP and similarly aim of the eligibility criteria I expect for Horizon Europe, I expect done by the European Commission. Looking at the second point, navigating resistance and building allies, meaning knowing who is on board already, who is not and may be hesitating, and then who might have certain concerns or resistance. And mapping and our mapping of stakeholders and also mapping that the resistance will help us to argue and to overcome these resistances that they may, let's say, impede the GEP implementation or certain activities within the GEP. Identifying our allies or maybe even champions within each group of stakeholders will help us to promote the GEP goals while addressing concerns to ensure that the resistance doesn't derail our progress. And having these allies and extending our allies network will support the, let's say, long-lasting implementation and successful implementation of GEPs. Looking at contextualization of or contextualizing a solution with local knowledge is important to realize that every institution is unique. It has own culture, it has own policies and our dynamics. Also, which you will see later on, own structure. Yeah, there might be differences. The principles are the same, but then there are differences in bodies that play a role or will play or may play the role later on within the implementation. And local stakeholders, so those internal, provide insights that enable us to tailor GEP strategies effectively, that addresses the needs of those stakeholders. And by working with stakeholders to design context-specific solutions, we not only make the plan feasible, but also sustainable and long-term sustainable. And we are making sure that it aligns with the institution's values and needs. Going to the next point, focusing on fostering accountability and continuous improvement. is related to the stakeholders and mobilize stakeholders who can help establish a support system that maintains the momentum and progress over the GEP implementation. They will have a role in overseeing the GEP progress, providing feedback and suggesting adaptations as the circumstances may change over time or under the shocks. For example, COVID-19 would be the case. And this accountability structure is a key to ensuring that the GEPs are not short-lived projects, but become an integral part of the institutions. And the last one, which I found actually the aim by also AgriGEP and other sister project goes for, is that the stakeholder mapping and their mobilization helps us move from compliance-driven to values-driven change. That the engaged stakeholders will actively advocate for gender equality if they are aware of. Because I believe that, or let's say based on the experience within the Central and Eastern European countries, also we have stakeholders, they do not realize how important the gender equality is. They help also to embed the gender equality in the institutional culture. And this shift is essential for sustainability and will ensure that gender equality is not just a program, but a long-standing institutional commitment. So to sum it up, the exercise on stakeholder mapping and mobilization is not only a checklist item for GEP implementation, but the exercise and all the measures and activities or actions done within that are strategic, they are transformative, and they strongly support anchoring the gender equality within the institutions, ensuring so that our efforts is let's say the agent of change are resilient, impactful, and enduring. And yeah, so this was like very general, let's say, start, but I would like to go to the next slide and show you how we actually approach it within AgriGEP project, where, yeah, unfortunately seems that, yeah, like the first, that yeah, the design slightly changed the slide, so I'm sorry for that. Yeah, but the left side with the green flower, they are the widening AgriGEP partners with their first GEP, and I must say, with all the respect, that we had a very low expertise, internal expertise about a GEP creation, a GEP implementation, and gender equality knowledge and skills in general. Within the exercise, which was built upon the tool developed under the Supera project. I'm happy that Esther is with us here. We conducted like two main steps at the initial stage, mapping and analyzing stakeholders at each university. So the core team and the gender equality plan implementation team sit together and get together all the stakeholders while listing down also the challenges that they had and the contributions or how they see it. And they did it, as you may see, the external, internal, potential, existing, and new. Then the AgriGEP creates something which is like a co-designing platform. We all sit together under the or in the online session and sharing our insights, but also sharing the stakeholders. And the last point was done a year later, so starting the regular updating of the map, because the map is not static, but is dynamic. And this all was done under the mentoring partners, especially Yellow Window, highly experienced in that, and then our second partner, Polytechnic University in Catalonia, Spain. So very briefly, I stop here before the second question.
Yes, thanks a lot, Jana. That's a very great overview and some key important messages to take away. I think I'll get back to those later. But thinking about this procedure that you just described, what we did internally at AgriGEP, what are some of the key, let's say, findings and outcomes from the stakeholder mapping that you conducted? Were there any areas or common patterns or insights that emerged from this exercise, let's say, from the 3 universities involved?
Thank you very much. If we may go to next slides, if our audience caught the question. Yes, like don't panic yet, but this is how actually is the visual outcome of the mapping. This is the aggregated one of the 3 universities, and similarly, if you haven't started at your institution, this can be it, and it's quite nicely done for the presentation. We used let's say co-creative platform Miro, and then where also you don't have to be in person together, but you can work in the virtual environment, but everyone is participating. The colors here shows the violet, which are prevalent, I must say, is the commonalities, where at least 2 universities out of 3 found the same or like very similar stakeholders and identify them in this. Also, they place them to primary, secondary, or tertiary based on the importance, but then whether existing or new, external or internal. I would like to, and there is no point to go into the details. It's institutional specific, context specific. But one of the lessons learned might be that if like different institutions get together and they share what they collected at their institutions, they may also find out that they may overseen something or haven't realized something, or also some potential stakeholders were identified, and start thinking about whether like this group of stakeholders might be important for my institution too, and to what extent and how to engage them. So the co-designing and co-creative environment is quite important. I would like to highlight here the commonalities with what we found all, that we have the Gender Equality Office or the working group on that as an internal and primary stakeholder. Then external and primary is the national contact point, gender and science import, which can be used quite as a support for any measures and activities we do. Then there are also differences, and they are, let's say, done by in an anonymized way by color, where some institutions focus more on labor union as let's say, primary and important stakeholders, while other university not based on the settings. Maybe next slide. Yes. We also identified the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So those are, let's say, items that can help us, and also those that may be barriers in our GEP implementation, but also the stakeholder mapping as such. Here, I would like to highlight that the strength is the AgriGEP team. In all 3 widening partners, we realized that without AgriGEP and this initiative, it would be much more difficult, if ever happening, this exercise and realizing it. Similarly with the institutional setting at EU and national levels. The opportunities then are within networking of the other universities, but also the internal mobilization of the stakeholders or working with the alumni. The weaknesses is definitely lack of experience, lack of experience sharing with stakeholders, lacking private for-profit stakeholders, to some extent also lacking the international connection and weak coordination of gender equality activities at the universities. And the threats are definitely the funds. Yeah, currently all the partners organizations are more or less 100% reliant only on external budget. and low or no external visibility of the gender equality importance for the universities, which would be the message for the external stakeholders, but also internal actually, but the external for sure. And next, please. Highlighting the key findings where there was no systematic approach to stakeholders before such exercise. Also, there is no centralized information about stakeholders, mostly built upon the personal context. So we're really sitting together and finding and collecting actually the individual's contacts and scattered initiatives all over the university. Then few stakeholders, external stakeholders were identified in all three universities. Private for-profit sectors are, and their engagement are rather low or missing at all. There are different levels of engagement and low external interest in promoting gender equality in academia in general. This is one of the specificity of the region, I must say. And the last point. Well, we found that the exercise, even though we struggled a bit at the beginning, was quite contributing it's contributing to GEP implementation in general, but I wanted to highlight here our own findings and experience from the first one. It triggered the discussion about stakeholders and their engagement very significantly. Then it increased the focus on networking activities with whom, how, what we want to communicate. This is the point below. What are the key messages and what is actually the reputation and the picture of the institutions related to gender equality that we would like to communicate. It helps identifying the gaps or missing stakeholders and the co-designing or the co-creative environment and sharing, an open sharing. And this is quite important, that a safe environment allows us to speak honestly and to find the solutions on behalf of all. This is all from my part, and I would like to ask Julianna and then Štefan as partners or organizations to highlight the challenges which Ben, sorry.
Yes, indeed. No, not at all. Indeed, the last question we wanted to hear on this experience, a reflection on what challenges you faced so far, whether you have addressed them or how you're planning to. So, yes, Julianna.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Jana, for the presentation and describing all the process, how we went through on this stakeholder mapping exercise. So yes, I have to say that we faced with several challenges. Probably the most significant on the beginning of the process was the lack of proper information. So when we said from the side of the AgriGEP core team, this department or person is a key person and should have been a stakeholder who is responsible for some important activities, actions, or even a gatekeeper. When we connected them, they said, no, sorry, we don't have anything to do with gender equality, because they did not realize what we are talking about, what the exact content is and why is it important. And whenever we describe the process itself and the responsible areas, they definitely said, oh yes, this is our work and this is what we are doing. And yes, we are responsible for such an activities. But before, I did not realize it has such important gender equality aspect, and I should do my job, organize the procedures, everything related to gender equality. So that was very, very critical and important. And I have to say that after 1.5 years, we realized that it's mainly related to the lack of knowledge experts within the organization. So we missing those persons who could get training before related to gender equality or gender equality strategy establishment. And therefore, these people are missing from the organization. The information is also missing, and these departments were not able to identify that they would have a significant and important role in the procedures, in the activities, and they should engage with the GEP implementation. So that was pretty challenging. And still, I have to say that it's part of the strategy to provide information and share knowledge to make it clear and provide proper, correct information about the gender equality plan, its content and importance.
Thanks a lot, Juliana. That's a very critical challenge to highlight. Štefan, how was your experience?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. I have to say that Jana nicely presented and very comprehensively also presented how was this process going on. And also now Juliana also addressed some challenges which are similar between all of us, I would say. First of all, in the beginning, this was the problem that it was relatively new tool and less known. And also there were no information and knowledge how to start and how to see what is now this. Because gender equality plan was adopted, it is implementation, but no really ongoing discussion about this and lack of information about this. So what started with this process within our project is that we were raising somehow awareness about this, started discussion, and also we got some experiences doing with each other. So it was also a lot of exchanging between us of partners. And so we learn from each other also about this. However, we at the same time organize several awareness campaigns. So that's, I think, also done by other partners. And with this knowledge, understanding, and importance of that topic has increased. So it was somehow in light of people seeing that we need to do something about this. So with increasing interest also, there was clearly visible widening and deepening not only knowledge, but also understanding who can be our potential partners or who are our stakeholders. And then this exercise with mapping and mobilization of stakeholders actually nicely also presented graphically, and we also presented descriptively who can be this and who actually are. And we gradually revised this, because at the beginning we started with very narrow core team and people who were around us, but then we noticed that there are many others. So we started with internal first. That means our academic staff, management staff, also students were deeply interested and also engaged in this. But then we noticed also that there are several external stakeholders, and that's our also some enterprises, because we presented also in one company. And also recently we noticed it is in interest of our major employer in the region, that's the Port of Koper. So in addition, we noticed that there are also other stakeholders in the country and also outside. So that's somehow now we have much better picture about this hidden we got some new information which was before hidden. That's, I think, very important, what was actually like a result of this, because we started almost from zero and come now to some, I would say, it is not yet perfect picture, but we got rather good picture about this. And now crucial is how to continue with this. So how to keep sustainability of this, because both Jana and Juliana mentioned that it requires some funds, not only on external funds, but also internal funds. It's necessary to have staff, but also if you have staff, you have to pay this. And that's now what is the new challenge which we see. It is not now yet this year and next year, because we are working on this, but in future it is important. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks a lot to all of you. Thank you, Jana, Juliana, and Štefan, for this. Indeed, if I can briefly reflect on what we heard so far, the value of stakeholder mobilization in mapping brings the stakeholders' ownership, that is a very crucial part for the gender equality plan implementation, the value of accountability and how the gender equality becomes an institution of value, but also the importance of mutual exchange, like what the exercise that you did amongst you, the areas that this exercise highlighted, the weaknesses, the areas that you were not aware before. So keeping those reflections in mind, let's move to the next part of our webinar, which will welcome two guest speakers who have plenty of experience in institutional change for gender equality, but also in stakeholders mobilization. So today with us, we have Esther Cois and Maria San Giuliano. Allow me to briefly introduce them before we dive into their questions. Esther Cois is a sociologist at the University of Cagliari, where is the rector's delegate for gender equality and president of the Guarantee Committee for Social Inclusion. Since 2024, she's been also the president of the National Conference of Equality Bodies of Italian Universities. And as a member of the Horizon 2020 project Supera, she contributed to the definition of the first gender equality plan at the University of Cagliari in 2020. And she also contributed to the definition of, in 2021, of the official national guidelines for drafting of gender equality plans at all Italian universities. Maria San Giuliano is the research director. She's also a gender expert and trainer and co-owner at Smart Venice, where she has led the development of the research and consultancy branch of the company since its beginning. She currently leads and provides scientific and methodological advice and guidance, and she supervises the Smart Venice project portfolio. She's also in charge of the strategic partnership development of the organization. So thank you both for being here with us. We look forward to your experiences, and allow me to start first with Esther. Esther, at the University of Cagliari, as I mentioned before, you've been part of the Supera project, a project which similar to AgriGEP, aimed at implementing gender equality plans in research performing, but also funding organizations for this sustainable institutional change that we are all aiming for. You initiated stakeholder mapping for your university from scratch. Could you walk us through how you approached this in the early stages? Were there any specific tools or frameworks developed during the project to facilitate this process? Of course, spoiler alert, we discussed that briefly before when Jana was presented, but feel free to share more.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pan, and good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for involving me in this webinar. Yes, since the very beginning, during the first 2 years of the project, the Supera team at the University of Cagliari has been engaging its community with a participatory process, aiming at profoundly changing our organization for greater inclusiveness, effective equity in a gender-sensitive way. We have steered institutional dynamics, starting from comprehensive diagnosis of the status quo in terms of gender bias and inequalities, and especially, as mentioned before, establishing a gender equality hub for involving stakeholders and supporting the design of innovative and coordinated actions, constituting a fully fledged GEP, and for approving it, in our case, at the University of Cagliari. This happened in the middle of the project after 2 years, with the formal adoption of our first GEP in 2020. You know, the Italian university context is ruled according to public administration logic, less according to managerial logic. Rules and procedures, mainly guided by administrative law, are combined with the use of management tools. And in such an organizational context, structural changes that are proposed from the bottom need a strong legitimization from the top. And once accepted, they have to be transformed into new management logics and policies expressed in specific official documents. This is the reason why a strategic choice was made both in identifying the members of the Supera core team at the University of Cagliari that was fully involved in the 4 years project, and in identifying the members of the so-called Gender Equality Hub, who included strategic and leadership positions at the University of Cagliari. These two teams can be conceived as two rings of different size that constitute the operational structure that the University of Cagliari has created to activate before the design and after the implementation process of the GEP. The core team was made up of 15 people with different background, role, responsibilities, who represent different departments in a very multidisciplinary perspective. Our leader was an engineer, so we were very different. The second, the hub, was a network of selected allies or champions made up of 12 people with leadership roles at the top of the university, constituted by stakeholders disseminated throughout the institution, both both horizontally in terms of areas of expertise and vertically in terms of management level and access to decision-making processes, because this is the very important thing. The hub was regularly engaged through capacity building and participatory activities and represented the whole community, especially thanks to the inclusion of student representatives also. And this choice allowed us to influence and push toward the process of institutional change. To design the Unica GEP, the core team has considered from the beginning that gender equality is not a neutral area to start institutional change, and was forced to reflect on and identify key actions that would allow us to address the rules still prevailing in academia and in Italian academia that are highly gendered, in order to focus on a few strategic choices that could be accepted or negotiated with the rector, the Senate, and our academic community. For example, using a gender equality baseline assessment at the very beginning has been very helpful in opening a sort of a Pandora's box on gender issues in our university context. And based on this, the core team and the hub decided to choose just some activities that could allow or redefining existing regulations and procedures, or through regular meetings to open new scenarios in which issues relating to gender equality could find an adequate space for a new dialogue. So basically, we have considered the university as a community of practice in which participation allows all members to socialize in a guided way with new management logics that take into account gender equality.
Thanks a lot, Esther, for this first reflection. Focusing on the stakeholder mobilization, how did you see from your experience that has influenced the implementation of the GEP? Are there any success stories reflecting now, or key examples that you would like to highlight that you've seen, you noticed that they had a notable impact?
Yes, as I was saying, the mobilization of stakeholders was fundamental to define the design and then enable the implementation of our GEP. We started from the recognition of resistance of all kinds to the introduction of this new tool, the GEP, in our university, because this preliminary investigation allowed us to better highlight the critical issues on which to intervene with specific actions, which then became the 32 actions of our GEP. For example, a very complicated thematic area, even to understand, as well to translate into concrete actions, was that relating to the integration of a gender perspective in teaching and research, whatever the disciplinary field. And mobilizing stakeholders was very, very useful to us to understand what to do, both through periodic meetings with the hub and through the Fab Labs and other kind of capacity building and training activities that we organize even before completing and approving the GEP, in order to take insights about the choice of the most appropriate actions. I am thinking, for example, about the organization of self-managed seminars by students on the topic of gender-sensitive practices within the university, in which we, members of the Super core team or the hub, participated as keynote speakers, collecting a lot of feedback from students, or the collaboration with national networks involved in STEM fields, for example, the National Institute of Physics, which organized with us initiatives for the dissemination of science from a gender-sensitive perspective, which were very useful to strengthen and direct in the best possible way the actions included in the GEP. But I would especially like to underline 3 things very briefly that I consider success stories at the University of Cagliari, and which happen thanks to the mobilization of stakeholders from the top and from the bottom in the implementation phase of this first gender equality plan. First of all, the adoption of a gender-sensitive perspective, and therefore all the content of the GEP, was officially and formally included as a cross-cutting frame from all the areas of the university in its new 3-year plan, strategic plan. This means that any sector from human resources management to research to internationalization to the, I don't know, sustainability of infrastructures, for any action, it should necessarily pass through a check of its consistency with the contents of the guidelines of the gender equality plan, strengthening the commitment that had previously been undertaken by the university with the adoption of other tools, like, for example, the gender budgeting. Secondly, thanks to the collective work on the gender equality plan with the mobilization of stakeholders, for the first time in April 2021, as you mentioned before, the University of Cagliari introduced in its organizational chart a new position, the position of the Rector's Delegate for Gender Equality, as a part of its strategy towards a more inclusive university. And the role of this new delegate, that's me in this case, but it's a new role, is the promotion of gender equality and diversity and the fight against any kind of gender-based and not just gender-based discrimination for all the communities that interact day by day in the university context. And finally, thirdly, the third success story, thanks to the mobilization of stakeholders, we promoted and approved the creation of the first University Center for Research and Studies on Gender Issues, called CHANGE, which represents a permanent place to develop research on these issues, but also to strengthen the operational change that links the development of research on gender and diversity issues with the promotion of organizational well-being in our university through the very close relationship with the Guarantee Committee for Social Inclusion, or equality body, that is composed of 10 members, which already existed within the University of Cagliari.
Well, thanks a lot, Esther. Thanks for the practical examples. I think the last question that focuses on the lasting impact from what you answered now is pretty obvious, the lasting impact. We can have some concrete examples, but is there anything that additionally would you like to highlight? So.
Yeah, the Supra project has been absolutely fundamental, reflecting on it a few years after its conclusion. In my opinion, above all, for the inclusive institutional culture that it has helped to strengthen within our university, giving us the opportunity to reach and involve stakeholders, many stakeholders, also external stakeholders, in the fight against any form of discrimination, and even better, in the valorization of all diversities in a perspective that is now no longer only focused on gender inequalities, but it takes on an intersectional perspective, taking into account the combination of other kinds of vulnerabilities, from socioeconomic status to migratory background to health status and so on. Then, in my opinion, the lasting impact has been for the participatory nature of the Supra project, from the top governance to its capacity to compact the university community, that of being a multiplier of opportunities for the University of Cagliari, which have further implemented our institutional change in an inclusive sense. So the GEP was a starting point, not the end of the story. It has been a multiplier at the internal university level, for example, through our candidacy and then obtaining the European Certification Human Resources Strategies for Researchers that we obtained at the beginning of this year, thanks to which our commitment to inclusive issues in a broad sense was formally recognized, and which has provided us with a further specific action plan on the point. But also to the introduction in our educational offer of specific courses on the topic of gender equality. For example, a specific course on policies for gender equality aimed at PhD students of any disciplinary fields. And it was also a multiplier at the national level, because our GEP was considered a good practice at the national level. So we are now member of the National Conference of Rectors in the Commission for Gender Issues, and we have been chosen as an inspiring practice and the benchmark for the drafting of the guidelines on how to design and implement the gender equality plans to all Italian universities. And another thing, we have now also the presidency of the National Conference of Equality Bodies of all Italian universities. So we have a valuable sort of observatory to coordinate the network of Italian university in the direction of an ever greater sustainability of inclusive policies and valorization of diversity. And last but not least, it has been a multiplier of at an international level, because the reputational capital obtained thanks to the credibility of the GEP strongly share not only with the stakeholders within the university, but also with our regional, for example, and national context of reference, has led us to enter various European networks and partnerships on extremely useful and interesting projects on these issues, such as, for example, the SMILE project, which had the objective of developing and implementing innovative tools that improve the way higher education institutions deal with diversity and social inclusion, or becoming members of the European network UCAN for lifelong learning in higher educations, or of other networks of universities involved first, for example, the UNICEF projects, and now the Gender Safe project for the fight against gender violence within the academic context. In short, the mobilization of stakeholders has consolidated our long-lasting and frontline commitment as a university on these issues and on different geographical scales.
Well, thanks a lot, Esther, for this. I think from your sharing now, we have great proof that shows that stakeholders mapping and mobilization can start as an internal reflection exercise that identifies those areas that were highlighted before by AgriGEP partners, but has potential for local and national scale, and can indeed ensure a lasting impact. Thanks a lot again for this. We'll come back perhaps with some questions at the Q&A session, and I'd like now to invite Maria for her experience. So Maria San Giuliano, thanks again for being here with us. You have great experience with Caliber and Equalis, two projects that now have ended, but they aimed similarly to Supera and AgriGEP to implement gender equality practices through the implementation of gender equality plans, again focusing on research performing, but also funding organizations. So my first question to you is that, from your experience, how have partners effectively approached the stakeholder mapping and mobilization? Could you perhaps share some examples that might be also similar to what we heard before, the common challenges that tend to arise during that process?
Sure. Thank you, Pan. Thank you to the AgriGEP consortium for the invitation. I'm really pleased to have this exchange opportunity. And indeed, a lot of the already mentioned issues were really resonating with my experience and the experience of the consortia that I've been working with. I'll try to add, it's difficult after such comprehensive and insightful presentation, I'll try to add something to the discussion, mostly by stressing the fact that throughout the project that I've been supporting, we have been framing institutional change for gender equality in research as a complex endeavor by itself. And so with this complexity-oriented framework, we have positioned the participatory character of GEP's design and implementation, particularly now that inclusiveness and intersectionality comes into the picture, as also Esther was mentioning. And this participatory character and feature, we have interpreted it in a multifold way, both as intersectional, internal, and intersectoral as well. An effective way to operate based on what we did in Caliper in particular, and now we are also building on Caliper results in the Nexus sister project, is to work in parallel with internal and external stakeholder mapping and mobilization. You are doing something similar, I understood in AgriGEP. In both cases, for us, it has been a matter of really identifying opportunities for alliances, mapping interests, capacities, and potential win-win in terms of designing actions on inclusive gender equality. As I like to say, change to achieve inclusive gender equality, particularly with an intersectional approach, cannot be a solo activity. It requires a lot of negotiations, consensus building, particularly in times when gender equality, intersectionality have become quite controversial and polarizing issues. So there is even a stronger need of participation and discussion on this, and alliances building in particular. In Nexus, basically, we have in both Nexus and Caliper, actually, we emphasize the fact that we are at risk of limiting the outcomes and potential achievement of gender equality, inclusive gender equality policies if we operate in silos. And if research organizations operate in silos and do not leverage on collaboration with other research performing organizations, research funding entities, or public authorities, NGOs, as well as private companies and the publishing sector. So what we try to do is to foster internal institutional change by using also collaboration with external stakeholders as a leverage, and to position institutional change in the broader context of changing our R&I ecosystems to make them more inclusive. In Caliper, we have in practice worked in two parallel tracks. Basically, on one hand, we started with an internal co-design setting, preceded by a mapping of internal capacities and expertise on gender equality. And at the same time, after this was achieved, along with an internal assessment of gender inequalities and existing gaps, we have proceeded with analyzing and mapping the regional and national research and innovation ecosystems where each partner was situated. In that frame, in that context, we used social network analysis tools. So we mapped existing ties and connections that each partner was positioned within. And this was really of help to spotlight some gender gaps within every partner institution in the leadership and management of external interactions and collaboration. In certain cases, the map helped, the social network analysis maps, they helped to visualize and make it very tangible how collaborations, for example, on third mission or on science communication activities and projects tended to be led by women, while on the opposite, hard STEM industry collaboration partnerships were led by men. And this is just an example. And so here we had, in Caliper, we had two different tracks. Co-design settings with internal stakeholders, also using scenario building techniques, followed by so-called research and innovation dialogues with external stakeholders. where the results from the internal work were presented, discussed, and opportunities for collaborations were searched for. In Nexus, instead, and this is also due to less available resources and a shorter time frame, we are trying to condense these two tracks into a single co-design mechanism that we have named as Open Labs. There are co-creation workshops that each implementing partner has organized with internal and external stakeholders. In this case, a lower number of carefully selected external stakeholders. So you see these two different approaches, and here in Nexus we work on a 2 years time frame, while in Caliper we had 4 years available to achieve similar results. It is true that partners are supposed to have already existing GEPs in this new compliance-driven scenario, as Jana was mentioning earlier on. But in this compliance-driven, really the scenario, really the risk is that GEPs are produced as a formal check boxes to be compliant, and that inclusive gender equality policies are sort of kept in isolation. So there's really an increased need for participation and engagement, even more than the previous policy scenario. But while at the same time, and paradoxically, there are less resources available for sister projects. Yeah. So we try to navigate this paradox as well.
I think a common pattern that we hear from what we heard so far is the importance of, for an effective approach to stakeholder mapping and mobilization is the implementation of participatory and co-creation techniques. I think this is something that we can agree has been reflected so far. And thinking about the obstacles that you mentioned indeed now, Maria, given that AgriGEP partners, but also additional members from our audience might be at these beginning stages of stakeholder mobilization and engagement. What would you recommend for overcoming typical obstacles at this phase?
Yeah, here I would like to stress two issues in particular when it comes about stages. I really think that a participatory approach to inclusive gender equality plans in research and innovation really applies to all of the key phases of the GEPs cycle, but indeed the initial phases are key. Here, stakeholder mapping and engagement can, I believe, can be positively linked to the internal initial assessment of gender inequalities, and is crucial to guide strategic thinking and the following GEP design stages with an evidence-based approach. So it could be considered as part of an overall data collection process where we also chart the state of the art in terms of inequalities with a participatory approach. So I see potentials in this. A relevant obstacle to be taken into account that was already mentioned anyway is, and that we also spotted and had to face, is the lack of internal capacities, knowledge, and resources allocated to actually enable this type of activities. In Caliper, in Nexus as well, we had one or more partners, as it was the case for you, for your project, with specific expertise, supporting the implementing partners, providing know-how, methodological guidelines, tools on how to proceed with both stakeholder mapping and engagement. So there were related deliverables attached to this feature. And dedicated training sessions were organized, targeting the GEPs teams and the partners. And still, this proved to be essential to have, indeed. Still, in certain cases, it happened that the GEPs teams preferred to hire, for example, external facilitators for the co-design sessions and for the workshops. And not always they felt confident enough with the existing teams to particularly to play the role of facilitators. So there's an aspect related to, and the challenge related to knowledge and capacity building. And again, the available resources. Nowadays, we know that we have projects with that work with more challenging countries, because the presence of widening countries is requested and emphasized in the call for proposals. There is an additional challenge that is related to intersectionality, as I mentioned, lower, less available resources. So sometimes I perceive a risk that this can lead to sacrificing a bit the efforts and human resources put on participation and engagement. So this is a potential risk. Another risk or challenge that we observe is related to achieving inclusive engagement, or maximizing inclusiveness in participation and engagement efforts. So to this, we know that of course, we can build on feminist and intersectional approaches to co-creation and co-design, and be inspired by those. But and in that sense, it's important to really have a few guiding questions in mind, spotting, for example, who do we really want to work with, and whose voices do we want to ensure that are heard in order to have an intersectional approach integrated within the change process? Or how can we communicate and reach out beyond the usual suspects of already motivated or represented persons or organizations? So also keeping, being guided by questioning ourselves on how do we promote the engagement of people and organizations from minorities or less powerful groups, and also trying to expand the definition of innovation ecosystems to make those more inclusive. So going beyond the powerful industry players or the funders of research, and trying to engage with gender experts, feminist organizations, as also relevant partners within R&I ecosystems. there are a lot of examples that can be raised from the projects that I have been working with. Like, for example, a lot can be done to address intersections of gender and class by engaging with internal unions that are not always kept in the loop of participation, or postdoc associations and networks of precarious workers, for example, in research, but also fostering conversations and building the possibility of shaping policies that address sensitive intersectional issues that imply contrasting racism and homotransphobia together with sexism. This can be facilitated by a stakeholder engagement approach that makes space to racialized women or LGBTQI people that might not normally or spontaneously be in our radar, or feel appealed to participate. So we might want to, put additional efforts to really reach out to these communities. Yeah, and this I think are I would say these are the key challenges in the experience with Caliper. Working on intersectionality was facilitated by the interaction and collaboration with external stakeholders, especially NGOs representing LGBTQI plus groups and communities. Because in a way, the universities, they felt they didn't have the needed vocabulary, the needed expertise, the specific understanding of the needs of those communities. And in that sense, this knowledge gap, this sort of, not only knowledge, is a mixture of representation and knowledge gaps, was covered by a participatory and an inclusive approach.
Maria, you already reflected a bit on your Nexus experience. So for those who are not aware, Nexus is a sister project of AgriGEP that aims to address inclusivity gaps through intersectional gender equality plans. From your experience so far, partners coming from widening countries, do they face similar challenges to those that you described now? If you can briefly respond to that, because we want to also move to the questions from the audience.
Sure.
What is your experience so far?
I'll be brief on that, because for me the question is challenging, and I was reflecting, this widening concept keeps together, in my view, a too broad set of countries that makes it very difficult to generalize. The definition itself features low R&I performance, right? But at the same time, these countries can be totally different from one another. We have Central and Eastern European countries where we know that there is a higher representation of women in STEM research compared with the EU average. We have, but at the same time, lack of specific policies to address the issue in a more thorough way beyond head counts, so to speak. On the other hand, we have southern Mediterranean countries like Portugal, for example, where for few years ago, gender equality plans in public bodies and research organizations were subject of regional policies, and for a period funding were made available to public bodies and universities by the regions to via structural funds to work on gender equality plans. So really different, very different contexts. We know that when I read through your question, the first thing I reflected upon was a report delivered a few years ago in 2018 by the ERA Standing Working Group on Gender in Research and Innovation that highlighted quite an evident correlation between the two indicators of the AgriGEP Gender Equality Index on one hand and the innovation scoreboard on the other, showing how innovation leaders were also, countries that were reported as innovation leaders were also among the most advanced countries on gender equality policies, even though there was not a causality link that was proved, but it was quite thought-provoking in terms of, making it clear that this would merit further research and attention. But having said that, when I think at the practical experience with the partners I've been working with, I tend to make a distinction between former CSI countries, for example, or and I've been reflecting on the fact that without generalizing, of course, or stereotyping, but I had the experience that the higher representation of women in STEM research that I was referring to in those countries sometimes is argued, is used as an argument to stress that there is no need for gender equality policies in our context. Or sometimes I had the chance to appraise a sort of formal or bureaucratic institutional culture where the informal networking component that is normally part of stakeholder engagement was not so easy to achieve or was found a bit challenging by partners, particularly collaborating with external stakeholders. There was this, priority given to the reputation of our institution, that we do not really would like to expose our internal challenges to external stakeholders and so forth, so on and so forth. But I would be a bit cautious because I don't like the idea to generalize. And as I said, the set of countries is really diverse. And I have to say that thinking again to Eastern, Central and Eastern European countries, in general, the partners that I worked with there were bringing a lot of motivation and enthusiasm to work in sometimes in not easy economic, socioeconomic and political contexts. So not really favorable to gender equality policies. In Nexus, but still, in spite of the challenges, bringing in extra motivation. In Nexus, we have Serbian partners that are currently promoting an action in their GEP to increase the enrollment rates of Roma girls and students in STEM curricula. And they are collaborating with a local NGO that has a reach out to the Roma communities. Or our Hungarian partners have managed to successfully operate the open labs in their own institution and to design meaningful GEPs actions in a context where gender studies are banned and gender ideology rhetorics have become institutionalized, sort of. So
thank you, Maria. If I may stop you here, so to rely some reflection from the audience, that was very practical. Thank you again both for being here and for sharing these examples. I think it gave us great food of thought and vision to see how such an activity can have such lasting impact. I've seen that we don't have any questions in the chat box so far. I invite you again to add your questions there, and now we have a session dedicated for that, but in parallel, we will also address two specific questions coming from the AgriGEP partners, particularly for Esther and Maria. I'd like both our AgriGEP partners and our guest speakers to be brief in case we have additional questions from the audience, so we have enough time to ask that. I'd like to ask first Juliana for her question to Esther.
Yes, thank you so much. So one issue that we faced and realized during the stakeholder engagement is the very low availability and engagement of stakeholders from the profit sector and the agribusiness sector. So what's your experience? Did you have to use a different strategy to reach out to stakeholders in the for-profit SMEs, industry partners, or non-profit sector NGOs? If yes, what was the main difference? How did you engage the industry partners successfully?
Esther, your 1 minute answer, please.
Okay. Yes. I think that if I were to identify differences in the way we have collaborated with stakeholders in the for-profit and non-profit sector, I could say that they have generally been two specific but complementary paths for the two sectors. In the case of the world of small, medium, and large enterprises, it has mainly been a question of project type collaboration or opportunities to exchange advice and experiences useful, for example, to contribute to obtaining the so-called certification for gender equality in more or less innovative companies, which has become an essential requirement in terms of accountability and performance evaluation in terms of social sustainability. And among the many events and occasions that have seen us involved in this area, I would just like to mention one, the participation at the Women 20, the event included in the G20 that was held in Italy at the end of 2021, precisely on the topic of gender equality in the international business world. So collaboration with the National and International Association of Women Entrepreneurs on this point. In this case, I would say that the mutual involvement with this type of stakeholders focus on sharing expertise, and often the university was the first to be contacted as an interlocutor and partner for concrete projects of local development and empowerment and women empowerment. In the second case, the contact with third sector stakeholders has instead more often a training and or awareness raising purpose. I am thinking, for example, of the many webinars with third sector associations on the topic of gender inequalities in the labor market, the fight against violence inside and outside academia, with many NGOs or civil society associations, cultural associations that are well known in the area and have a huge potential audience through events that are highly attended by the non-academic public, or even the collaborations with unions and sector associations in the professional world, like legal professions, or with press in the common commitment to the adoption and dissemination of a gender-sensitive language. I cite, for example, the National Association of Women Journalists in Italy, Giulia Giornaliste, with whom we have collaborated for years in the spirit of reciprocity. So projects in the first case and training in the second.
Thanks a lot, Esther. Thanks a lot. Štefan, your question to Maria.
Thank you very much. So Maria already mentioned lots about also our region, Central Eastern Europe, that we are different. I'm coming from Slovenia, not far actually from Venice, but we identify some difficulties maybe for future. So the initial stakeholder mapping conducted in AgriGEP project broke the ice, but the first experiences show that it should be a continuous process that requires time and resources. what would be your suggestion to top and middle management in raising awareness of its importance of sustainability?
Thank
Maria?
you. Thank you, Štefan, for your question. I think that in general, stakeholder engagement and participation tends to meet with a sort of an inherent resistance, particularly by management structures. In my view, not all of, again, it's impossible to generalize, but there is this lingering stereotype that perceives participation as a fluffy thing on top of the real policy efforts, right? So nice to have, but not that important, right? So for this reason, it's a difficult question in my view. So I would suggest, based on my experience, to leverage on 3 key arguments, giving the position of top and middle management in particular, that are also decision makers. So I would suggest to emphasize on the consensus building and the reputation component of stakeholder mobilization, both internally and externally, because this is something that can strengthen the position and reputation of the institution and its governance potentially. At the same time, it was already mentioned in the initial presentation, it brings along sustainability and solidity of the change, at least potentially. So building on co-designed solutions with stakeholders, promises to have more solid and durable results. As we have built into needs and perspectives that have been appraised bottom up. And then resources, stressing the resources potential, meaning that it is true on one hand that stakeholder engagement requires resources, but it can also pay off. And especially especially as far as the collaboration with external stakeholder is concerned, we have experiences from within the Caliper project in particular, where universities have joined forces and relied on funding or human resources from external organizations, public authorities, banking foundations, industry players that have co-funded certain activities on gender equality that were both relevant for institutional change and were bringing, added value to the territory as a whole.
Thanks a lot, Maria. I see no questions from our audience so far, so I would like to invite you again, now that we have concluded with the questions and the presentation. If you have any reflections, any areas that you feel that you need more clarification or advice, our 5 speakers are here to share their experience and advice. I don't see any questions, but I'd like to give you a few seconds, perhaps. Again, thanks a lot to all of you for this practical and reflection and insights. I'm looking into the chat. I don't have any personal message either. No questions in the chat box. So, all right then. And a last call perhaps to our AgriGEP partners, if they want to share anything. We already received some thanks. Thank you for being here. Before we conclude then, allow me to just briefly share with you the registration link and information about the upcoming webinar of this series that we mentioned at the beginning. Focuses on the power of words and visuals focus on a webinar focusing on inclusivity in communication will be offered by Supporter on the 18th of November at 11 Central Eastern European time. We'll dive into some examples on how communication strategy and approaches can be inclusive. This is an important webinar, I would say, particularly for communication marketing teams, but not only. You will find more information in the link that we provided now in the chat box. So we invite you to register, but also share it in your network. And before we go, perhaps a final request from us, the exit questionnaire, where we like to capture your feedback so far for this webinar in order to improve for the next one, to reflect on what we can do better. It would only take 2 minutes, so please spend 2 minutes to fill it. And once you do, we'd like to thank you and wish you a nice day ahead. Hope you all found it useful. Thanks again to all the speakers from AgriGEP and Maria and Esther for this practical sharing. And we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
a
you
lot.
all
very much.
Bye.
Thank you. It was a
Bye.
pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.